No one marries me, an old settler woman, sir. But I can birth babies. The rancher's reply shocked her, and they married against his family's will. The late winter sun hovered low over the valley, pale and tired, its light stretched thin across the frostbitten plains. Snow clung stubbornly to the ground, melting only where footsteps had pressed paths through the white. The wind carried a muted howl, not fierce, not wild, but lonely in a way that echoed through the ribs of anyone who listened too long. That morning, a woman walked along the wagon trail with her coat pulled tight, silver strands of hair slipping free beneath her bonnet. She moved as if the cold barely touched her, or perhaps as if she had lived with colder things than winter itself. Her name was Eloise Hartwell, 40 years old, weathered by years of labor and loss, tempered like iron in a quiet forge. Her hair had gone silver early, not from age but from a life lived too hard, too quietly, too close to the edges people pretended not to see. She carried only a carpetbag and a knot of hope she kept tucked behind her ribs, though hope had betrayed her more than once. She walked with purpose, though she knew no one in town expected anything of her. She had learned to keep her shoulders straight, even when the world tried to fold her in half. Ahead, the Avery Ranch spread across the land like a sleeping giant. Wooden fences, cattle pens, smoke drifting from a chimney where someone tended a morning fire. She paused at the gate, studying the place with the wary reverence of someone who had lost too many homes to believe any could truly hold her. But she stepped through anyway, boots cracking through ice, breath rising in a thin ghost that floated toward the sky. A man was at the fence line, hammer in hand, fixing a loose board while the cold reddened his knuckles. He looked up when he heard her approach. Colton Avery, 34. Broad-shouldered, calm-eyed, carrying his solitude like a well-worn coat. There was something in the way he stood, quiet, steady, unbothered by the harsh world, that drew the eyes without demanding them. He regarded her without judgment, without question. Simply watching. Eloise lifted her chin. "Sir, I'm—" Before she could finish, another figure emerged from the barn, wiping mud from his gloves. Nathan Brookline, a ranch hand in his late 30s, known for brittle pride and a tongue too sharp for its own good. He caught sight of her and scoffed before she even spoke. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked, voice cutting through the cold as if he meant to leave a mark. "Ain't hiring cooks or seamstresses today. And we sure ain't taking in strays." The words struck harder than the wind. Eloise steadied herself. "I came to ask for work. I can clean, mend, tend to stock. I can birth calves too. I've done it more years than I can count." Nathan shook his head with a thin smile that held no warmth. "You're too old for ranch work, miss. Don't need another person who'll slow us down." Colton's gaze sharpened at the remark, though he said nothing yet. Eloise swallowed, wishing her voice didn't tremble. "I'm not fragile, sir. I only look older than I am." Nathan snorted. "Silver hair says you're closer to your twilight than any useful season." Eloise's breath hitched. She tried again. "Please. I can earn my stay. I don't want charity." Nathan waved her off. "We don't want burdens either." Before the sting could settle too deep, Colton spoke at last, his voice low, warm, as steady as a hearth flame. "That's enough, Nathan." The ranch hand stiffened, but Colton didn't look at him. His eyes were on Eloise, studying her with the same patience he used when studying weather changes, as though her presence meant something the sky hadn't warned him of. "What brings you here?" he asked. Eloise hesitated, the truth rising uninvited. "I need a place to stay for the season, maybe longer if you'll have me. Folks don't hire women my age anymore. They think I'm past my use, past my chance." Her voice softened, almost a whisper the wind might steal. "No one marries a woman like me, sir. Silver-haired at 40. But I can birth babies still. I can keep a home together. I can labor as well as any young woman." The words spilled with more vulnerability than she meant to show. Her cheeks warmed. She braced for the familiar recoil, the pitying look, the dismissive nod, the turning away. Colton did none of those things. He stepped closer, the snow crunching beneath his boots, and she felt the weight of his attention settle over her like a heavy wool blanket. Not suffocating. Just present.
Real.
You walked far? He asked, voice softened by something she didn't understand. 3 days, she answered. From Dry Creek. That's a long road alone. I'm used to long roads, sir. A quiet stretched between them, the kind that felt like shared breath rather than silence. Nathan shifted impatiently behind them, but Colton didn't look away from her. You're not too old for work, he said finally. A ranch survives on steady hands, not young ones. Eloise blinked, caught off guard. So you'll hire me? His gaze traveled from her worn boots to the stubborn lift of her chin. I'll give you a trial. Room, meals, tasks to tend. If you work as you say, you stay. Her heart thudded once, sharp and disbelieving. You'd trust me? Colton's voice dropped low. I trust what I see. And I see someone who's done more surviving than most folks twice her age. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine resin and thawing earth, as if winter itself leaned in to listen. Nathan muttered under his breath. You'll regret it, Colton. Mark my words. Colton turned, his stare leveling Nathan with quiet authority. We'll see. Then he looked back at Eloise, expression unreadable yet strangely gentle. Come, he said. I'll show you the cabin. Eloise followed, her steps slow, each one heavy with disbelief. She had been turned away by so many doors, she had forgotten what it felt like for one to open. But as she walked behind him, watching the way his shoulders squared against the cold, a thought flickered through her. A thought she quickly pushed away, though it left a warm ache behind. Why, of all places, did this rancher choose to see her? The answer, she sensed, waited somewhere just beyond the next breath, like the first crack of spring beneath layers of unmelted snow. The cabin Colton led her to sat a little apart from the main house, tucked between two pines that leaned together like old friends sheltering secrets. Smoke curled from the small stone chimney, and a thin ribbon of thawed mud led from its porch to the packed snow. Eloise paused at the threshold, feeling the strange ache of standing before a doorway that did not yet belong to her but might, with enough steady work, become a place her breath could finally rest. Colton nodded toward it. You'll stay here. His tone was simple, unadorned, as though granting her a space was as natural as handing over a bundle of firewood. There's a stove inside, blankets, and a dry cot. If anything's missing, you tell me. Inside, the room was modest. One table, one cot, a chipped basin, and shelves bare as winter branches. Yet something about its emptiness felt like an invitation rather than a judgment. Eloise set her carpetbag on the cot and touched the windowsill, its wood worn smooth by past hands. She wondered who had slept here before her. Farm hands? Drifters? Women younger, stronger, more welcome? She tried not to linger on the comparison, but old doubts rose like shadows behind her ribs. Colton watched her a moment before speaking. Work starts early. You'll help with the cows first, then the kitchen. If you're not used to it, Eloise turned, lifting her chin. I've worked harder places, sir. He held her gaze, and she sensed he believed her. That in itself was rare enough to feel like warmth. When he left her to settle in, the silence in the room folded around her gently. She unpacked her few belongings. A pair of worn dresses, a mended shawl, a small Bible with a cracked spine. Last, she lifted a tiny pair of baby booties, knitted years ago in hope that never reached a cradle. She placed them on the shelf, facing outward, then closed her eyes to steady the ache in her chest. She whispered a promise to herself that she would not crumble here. Not again. Not where someone had offered her a chance. By afternoon, the sun had climbed higher, lighting the snow in a soft golden shimmer. Eloise stepped into the yard where ranch hands moved like figures carved from dust and determination. Some nodded politely, others barely spared her a glance. She accepted both with the same quiet dignity. Colton stood by the corral, checking a calf with a bandaged leg. You handle cattle before? He asked as she approached. Since I was 12, she answered. My daddy taught me before the fever took him. He handed her a pail of feed without hesitation. Good. Then you won't need schooling. Nathan Brookline stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her with a mix of suspicion and disdain. Hope she don't spook the stock, he muttered to another hand. Eloise pretended not to hear, but her stomach tightened. She reached for the calf gently, letting it sniff her hand before lifting the pail. The calf leaned toward her, trusting instantly, and Colton observed the moment with quiet approval. "You've got steady hands," he said. "Animals know steady better than humans do." The compliment was soft, almost accidental, but it bloomed inside her like a small fire she hadn't expected. Later, Clara Avery appeared from the main house, apron dusted with flour, her brown hair pinned neatly. She carried the air of a woman accustomed to things in proper order. When she saw Eloise by the fence, her smile thinned. "Colton told me he hired you." "Only for a trial," Eloise replied. "I don't aim to cause trouble." Clara's eyes drifted to the silver hair beneath her bonnet. "Trouble comes in many forms. We'll see how long you last." The words were wrapped in sweetness, but the warning beneath them was sharp. Eloise simply nodded, unwilling to challenge the sister of the man who gave her shelter. Evening settled slowly, dipping the sky into smoky blue. As the men finished their work, Eloise carried water to the kitchen, rolled dough for biscuits, and set stew to simmer. The warmth of the hearth eased some of the cold woven into her bones. Clara worked beside her for a while, her movements crisp and efficient. "My brother has a kind heart," Clara said suddenly. "Too kind at times. He thinks everyone deserves a chance." Eloise kept her hands steady on the dough. "Kindness is rare. I'm grateful for it. Just don't take advantage." Clara left the words hanging like frost on a branch. It was Edmund Avery who arrived last, a stern figure with tight-set features, older than Colton but colder in spirit. He strode into the kitchen, glanced at Eloise, and frowned as though he'd stepped into a draft. "Colton hired you?" "Yes, sir," she replied softly. "For work, nothing more." Edmund snorted. "See that it stays that way." His tone suggested something unspoken, something she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. When supper was served, Eloise kept to herself, eating in a corner near the stove. She watched Colton laugh quietly at something a ranch hand said, his smile brief but real. It softened the hard lines of his face. For a moment, she allowed herself to look at him without fear. Just a woman observing the man who had opened a door for her when every other had stayed shut. She wondered what kind of heart lived behind those quiet eyes, and why someone like him had chosen not to marry yet. As night deepened, Eloise slipped outside to fetch more firewood. Snowflakes drifted from the sky, soft as ash. The world seemed to hush itself. She carried the logs carefully, her breath forming pale clouds. When she turned toward her cabin, she saw Colton standing near the fence, staring into the night as if listening to something she couldn't hear. He noticed her and nodded. "Cold night." "I've known colder," she whispered. "Sometimes inside more than out." He studied her, quiet and thoughtful. She felt seen in a way that frightened her. "Eloise," he said softly, "if anyone here makes you feel less than welcome, you come to me. You've earned your place same as any of us." Her heart trembled at his words. She started to answer, but footsteps crunched behind her, Edmund's heavy stride cutting through the stillness. He looked between them, suspicion tightening his jaw. "Colton," Edmund said sharply, "we need to talk." Colton didn't move, and Eloise felt the air shift, the way it did right before a storm. Snow fell through the night like drifting feathers, light but relentless, and by dawn the ranch lay wrapped in a white hush that softened every outline, every sound. Eloise woke early in her small cabin, breath fogging the cold air, and for a moment she lay still, listening to the quiet pulse of winter against the window. She had slept lightly, haunted by Edmund's sharp voice echoing from the previous night. The memory clung to her like a shadow she couldn't shake. She rose, dressed in layers, and stepped outside. The cold bit her cheeks, but she welcomed it. Cold was honest. Cold didn't pretend to be something gentle. She crossed the yard toward the barn, where the faint glow of a lantern flickered within. Colton was already inside, brushing frost from a mare's coat. The animal leaned into him, trusting, as if sensing the steadiness of the man's spirit. He glanced up at her with a small nod. "Morning." "Morning," she replied, her voice soft. "Storm passed quicker than expected," he said. But the drifts are deep. Calves'll need checking. She nodded and moved toward the pens without waiting for instruction. Work was the one place she felt steady, and she clung to it like a rail on a moving wagon. Colton watched her for a moment before following, his boots crunching behind hers. Together they tended the young cattle, clearing snow from troughs, checking hooves, brushing ice from their coats. Their breaths mingled in clouds, disappearing into the pale morning light. At one point, Eloise slipped on a patch of hidden ice. Colton reached out instinctively, catching her elbow before she fell. His grip was warm, firm, steadying. She straightened, cheeks flushed from more than cold. "You all right?" he asked. "I am," she whispered, though her heart beat faster than she wished. His hand lingered for a second longer than necessary, and the moment hung between them, fragile, almost frightening in its tenderness, before he let go. By midday the sky had darkened again, clouds rolling low with another threat of snow. The air felt tight, as though holding its breath. Clara appeared on the porch, calling that lunch was ready. Inside, the kitchen smelled of bread and stew, the warmth a welcome respite from winter's bite. Eloise served the hands quietly, keeping her eyes lowered when she felt Edmund's stare burning across the table. Edmund broke the silence first. "Brother," he said, tone clipped, "we need to speak about the situation." Colton set down his spoon. "What situation?" Edmund cast a pointed glance toward Eloise. "You know damn well what I mean." Clara shifted uncomfortably. Nathan smirked into his plate. Eloise paused, hands tightening around the ladle. She braced herself. Edmund leaned forward. A woman her age, silver-haired, unmarried, no prospects, working around the ranch is bad enough. But you giving her a cabin? Letting her stay without a chaperone nearby? Folks will talk. Colton's jaw tightened. Folks talk anyway. Not like this, Edmund snapped. You're risking the family's standing. Investors won't take kindly to. I don't care about investors, Colton cut in, voice low but fierce. The room stiffened. Eloise stepped back from the table, heart pounding. She felt exposed, as though her presence alone had tainted the air. Shame crawled up her spine, hot and familiar. Clara attempted a gentler approach. Colton, we're only thinking of what's best for you. You need a proper wife someday. Someone young enough to give you a future. Her gaze flicked to Eloise with quiet cruelty. Eloise's throat tightened. She wanted to shrink, to vanish into the walls. But Colton spoke before she could. Eloise works harder than half the men here, he said calmly. She's earned her place. Nathan scoffed. Doesn't mean she belongs here. The words landed like stones. Eloise felt heat rise behind her eyes. She swallowed hard and set the ladle down. Clara folded her arms. Brother, you can't keep pretending she's just another hired hand. Colton's eyes lifted. She is. No, Clara whispered. She's becoming your responsibility. The air thickened, heavy with meaning Eloise could not bear. She stepped back again, bumping the counter, and the room seemed to tilt. She murmured, I'll finish the dishes outside, and slipped through the back door before anyone could stop her. The cold struck her skin like a slap. She walked until the kitchen noise faded into the whisper of wind. Behind the barn, out of sight, she pressed her palms to her face and breathed through the ache gathering in her chest. She had survived harder words, harsher judgments, but hearing them spoken in front of Colton, spoken with such certainty, cut deeper than she expected. She didn't see Colton until his shadow stretched beside hers in the snow. Eloise, he said softly, you didn't have to leave. She lowered her hands, trying to steady her voice. It's not my place to cause trouble. You didn't cause it. His calm only broke her further. Your family's right, she murmured. I don't belong here. Folks will think things they shouldn't. I'm too old. I'm wrong for this place. He stepped closer, close enough she felt the warmth of him through the cold air. His voice gentled, deepened. Who told you you're wrong? A lifetime has, she whispered. That's a terrible teacher, he said. Her breath hitched. She couldn't look at him. You're not a burden, Eloise, he continued. Not to me. The words wrapped around her like a wool blanket she feared to accept. But your family, she began. My family doesn't decide who belongs on my land, he said, quiet but firm. Tears pricked her eyes, unwanted, embarrassing. She wiped them quickly, but he saw. Eloise, he murmured. You deserve more than scraps of kindness. She tried to steady herself, but something inside her cracked open. Men don't say things like that to women like me. Then men like that don't know what they're looking at. Her breath faltered, the moment trembling like an icicle about to break. Before she could answer, the barn door burst open. Nathan stumbled out, breathless, shouting for Colton. There's trouble, he gasped. At the north fence. Edmund says you'd better get there now. Colton's eyes hardened. Without another word, he turned toward the field. Eloise stood frozen, his last words echoing in her chest like a warmth she wasn't sure she had the right to hold. The north fence lay half buried in snowdrifts, the rails cracked under the weight of the storm. Wind tore across the open field, carrying flecks of frost that stung the skin like grains of salt. Colton reached the broken section first, Edmund close behind, their silhouettes stark against the pale sweep of winter. Eloise followed at a distance, breath clouding as she hurried to catch up, though she wasn't sure she was wanted there. She stopped several paces away, watching as the two brothers surveyed the damage. A small herd of cattle had pushed against the weakened rails, spooked by the night storm, and one young steer lay tangled in the splintered wood. Blood mottled the snow around it in dark blooms. Colton knelt beside the trembling animal, murmuring something low and steady, the sound almost lost to the wind. Edmund stood stiffly, arms crossed, displeasure carved deep into his features. We can salvage the fence, Colton said, working to free the steer. Help me pull. Edmund didn't move. This wouldn't have happened if you weren't distracted. Colton froze but didn't look up. Distracted? You know what I mean, Edmund snapped. Your head's been somewhere else since she arrived. Eloise felt her breath catch. She stepped back, instinctively shrinking from the accusation. Nonsense, Colton muttered, cutting the rope around the steer's leg. This storm would have broken any fence. Edmund scoffed. You keep pretending she's just another worker. But the whole ranch sees how you look at her. A quiet thunder rolled through the space between them. Colton stood slowly, brushing snow from his gloves. And how is it I look at her? Like a man who's losing his good sense, Edmund said. She's older than you. She's been married before. She brings nothing, no dowry, no standing, no future heirs. Eloise felt the words like a blow. Her hand went to her chest, gripping the fabric of her coat. She wanted to turn away, to spare herself the humiliation, but she couldn't move. She brings honesty, Colton said, voice quiet but sharp. And strength. And decency. Edmund's jaw clenched. She'll ruin your reputation. She'll ruin ours. You're making a fool of yourself chasing after a woman with silver hair and nothing to offer but borrowed years. The wind paused. Even the cold seemed to still. Colton stepped toward his brother, anger simmering beneath his calm. Don't you ever speak of her like that. Eloise's breath shook. She had never expected anyone, much less a man like Colton, to defend her with that kind of fire. Edmund lifted his chin. I'm speaking truth. You're speaking cruelty, Colton answered. The steer bleated weakly, and Eloise forced her legs to move. She hurried forward, kneeling beside the frightened animal. It's all right, sweetheart, she murmured, stroking its neck. You're safe now. Colton knelt beside her immediately, their shoulders nearly touching. She could feel the tension thrumming beneath his skin. Together they checked the steer, working silently until its trembling eased. When it could stand, Colton lifted it gently, guiding it back inside the corral. Edmund watched, arms folded, eyes burning with disapproval. When the animal was secure, Eloise brushed snow from her skirts and turned to Colton, voice steady though her heart beat painfully. Your brother's right, she whispered. I don't want to cause trouble between you. You haven't, Colton said. She forced herself to hold his gaze. You heard what he said. Folks talk. They always have. I'm used to being the whisper in the room, the burden someone regrets helping. You don't have to defend me. I'm not defending you, Colton said quietly. I'm telling the truth. Her breath shivered in her chest. She searched his face for something. Pity, obligation, hesitation, but found none. Edmund approached then, anger burning beneath his voice. Colton, this ends now. She leaves by tomorrow. I won't allow her to ruin everything we've built. Colton turned toward him slowly. The look in his eyes was not fierce, not wild. It was calm, deeply rooted, immovable as a mountain. You don't decide who stays on my land, he said evenly. It's our land, Edmund snapped. No, Colton replied. It was Mama and Papa's, and they raised me to choose kindness over judgment. Edmund's face hardened. You're blinded by loneliness. And you're blinded by pride, Colton said. A long silence stretched between them, taut as a pulled rope. Then Edmund pointed at Eloise, voice low with warning. If she stays, then you do it without me. Colton didn't flinch. So be it. Edmund's shoulders stiffened. He turned and strode toward his horse, kicking up snow with each angry step. Clara appeared along the ridge then, drawn by the shouting. Edmund rode past her without a word, leaving her standing in the cold, face pale and stricken. Clara looked at Colton, voice trembling. Why can't you just let her go? She's not your responsibility. Colton answered without hesitation. People aren't responsibilities. Clara's eyes flicked to Eloise, full of disappointment and fear. You're choosing her over us. He shook his head. I'm choosing what's right. Clara looked as if she might cry. She turned away and hurried after her brother, leaving the three of them, Colton, Eloise, and the wind, alone in the white field. Eloise stared at the ground, whispering, You shouldn't have done that. Colton stepped closer. I didn't do it for thanks. That's what makes it harder, she said, voice breaking. I'm not worth what you're risking. He reached for her, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth of his hand. Eloise, you're worth far more than you know. She closed her eyes. A tear slipped free, freezing almost instantly on her cheek. Colton, she whispered, people like me don't get defended. We get dismissed. Forgotten. Put away. That ends here, he said. She shook her head, overwhelmed. Your family will never forgive this. Then that's their burden, he replied softly. Not mine. Before she could answer, a sudden crack echoed across the field. Wood splintered near the far edge of the corral. The horses inside reared, skittish. Colton turned sharply. That wasn't the wind. Eloise's breath halted as she saw it too, a dark figure near the treeline, slipping out of sight. Stay close, Colton said, voice dropping into something steel-like. But the shadow in the snow was already moving. Snow whispered across the open field as Colton moved toward the treeline, each step deliberate, controlled, carrying the weight of a man who had spent his whole life learning what danger felt like in the air. Eloise followed several paces behind, pulse thundering against her ribs, though she tried to steady it with deep, measured breaths. Winter carried a silence that made every crack of ice, every rustle of branches, sound sharper than it should. The figure they had seen melted into the shadows, leaving nothing but a sense of wrongness hanging over the land. Colton motioned for Eloise to stay back, but she refused to let the distance widen. If someone means harm, she said softly, I won't hide from it. Her voice trembled, not from fear but from something older, years of survival hardening into quiet resolve. He didn't argue, though his jaw tightened with concern. Together they approached the broken section of the corral, where splinters still hung in the air, like the aftermath of a violent thought. Snow had been disturbed in a set of heavy tracks leading toward the woods. The horses stamped in agitation, their breath rising like steam from boiling water. Eloise stepped closer to calm them, murmuring as she brushed her fingers along a mare's trembling flank. Colton crouched near the tracks, running his glove along the indentation. These are fresh, he murmured. Someone was watching us. His voice carried a new gravity, not fear but calculation, the way a quiet man measured storms before they broke overhead. When he rose, he scanned the ridge again. The sky had dimmed, clouds thickening until the late afternoon looked like twilight. He turned to Eloise. "Let's get inside. Whoever it was wanted us rattled." She nodded. But before they could leave, Clara appeared on horseback, face pale as the snow. She pulled the reins sharply. "Edmund saw the figure too," she said breathlessly. "He thinks it was one of the men trying to scare us off your land deal." Colton frowned deeply. "That feud again?" Clara nodded. "He said this is what comes of letting strangers close." Eloise felt the sting of the words, though Clara hadn't even looked at her when she spoke. It was always the same wound reopened by different mouths. But Colton's gaze flicked immediately to Eloise, and the look he gave her was not protective. It was unwavering, anchored, as if to say he would not let anyone twist her presence into a threat. Clara noticed the exchange, and something tightened in her expression. "Brother, this has gone far enough," she pleaded. "You're endangering all of us for a woman you barely know." Colton straightened, eyes steady. "I know enough." The tension seemed to ripple outward, as if the land itself held its breath. Eloise swallowed. "Your sister is right," she whispered. "I shouldn't be the reason your family tears apart." Clara's gaze softened at the tremor in Eloise's voice, but it did not yield. "You don't belong here," she said quietly. "You're making everything difficult." Eloise's chest tightened. She looked at the ground, feeling that old familiar collapse inside her. But then Colton stepped between them, not with force, but with a certainty that stopped Clara cold. "No," he said. "This isn't about her. This is about you wanting the world to stay comfortable and familiar, even if it's cruel." Clara's breath caught, shocked by his tone. Colton continued. "Eloise hasn't done one harmful thing. She works harder than anyone here. She's earned her place." Clara's voice cracked. "But she doesn't fit." Eloise felt the words slice cleanly, and she closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Before she could speak, Colton turned toward her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You fit," he murmured. "More than you know." The wind shifted, carrying the warmth of his words into her bones. She opened her eyes and something inside her, something brittle and buried, began to loosen with painful slowness. A shout suddenly pierced the air. Nathan came running from the barn, breathless. "Ryder coming fast," he yelled. "Edmund's on the ridge with him." Colton tensed. "What now?" They hurried toward the trail where two horses approached through the fading light. Edmund rode hard, face grim, while another rancher from a neighboring property followed close behind. When they reached the yard, Edmund dismounted without waiting for his horse to settle. "We found the trespassers' trail," he said, eyes dark. "Someone wants to scare us off the North Acres." Colton nodded. "I figured as much." The neighboring rancher shook his head. "You boys need to be careful. These feuds get ugly." His gaze drifted to Eloise with subtle disapproval. "And outsiders make easy targets." Colton's voice cooled. "She is not an outsider." The rancher ignored the correction. "You'd best decide what matters more, your land or your pride." The implication was clear. Eloise felt it like a tightening rope. Edmund stepped closer to Colton. "If you keep her here, they'll think she's your weakness. They'll use her." "She's no weakness," Colton said. "And I won't let fear decide who I keep close." The rancher shook his head, muttered something under his breath, then rode off into the darkening fields. Edmund lingered a moment longer, gaze torn between frustration and something more wounded. "You're choosing her," he said, voice cracking. "After everything." Colton met his brother's eyes. "I'm choosing what's right." Edmund looked away, jaw trembling. "I don't know you anymore," he whispered, then mounted and rode after the other man. Silence followed, heavy and cold. Colton turned to Eloise, his breath visible in the dusk. "I won't apologize," he said softly. "Not for choosing to stand with you." Eloise shook her head, tears rising unbidden. "You should," she whispered. "You're risking your family for a woman who came here with nothing." He stepped closer, his voice low enough to blend with the snow falling around them. "Eloise, you didn't come here with nothing. You came here with courage, Her breath trembled. Courage doesn't build a home. No, he said. But love does. The word struck her like warm light cutting through frozen air. She stared at him, unable to breathe. Colton exhaled, steady, certain. I love you, he said. Silver hair and all. Hard years and all. You are the woman I choose. And if you'll have me, I want you as my wife. Her heart broke open, quietly, beautifully, like thawing ice. She reached for his hand. I will, she whispered. But before their fingers met, a gunshot cracked across the valley. If this story touched you, even in the quiet places of your heart, I'd be honored if you stayed a little longer. Like, comment, and subscribe so these old frontier tales can keep riding your way. Tell me where you're watching from. Every corner of the world adds another ember to this fire. And if you want to wander deeper into love, second chances, and the grit of the Wild West, there's another story waiting for you just beyond this one. Click on the next tale, and let the journey continue.